The silent neighborhood. 7 in the morning. Ekbatan town, Tehran. The streets are quiet. Not because no one's awake, because no one knows that right now behind one of these doors, something has been buried for years. A city sanitation worker opens a dumpster in phase 3, just like every morning. A smell rises. One he thinks he knows. Rotten meat. Nothing unusual. He's wrong. What he's holding is part of a human body. Days earlier, it belonged to one of Iran's best-known documentary filmmakers. But the most horrifying part hasn't even happened yet. Because 3 days later, a man arrested for one murder opens his mouth and confesses to 2 more. 2 people who vanished from this same family years earlier. And not a single person ever reported them missing. This is the case of Babak Khorramdin, the story of a family that looked completely ordinary from the outside and was a buried graveyard on the inside. Sunday morning, mid-May 2021, Phase 3, Ekbatan town, Tehran. A city sanitation worker is doing his usual rounds. The truck engine is the only sound on the street. Nothing seems wrong until his hand touches a bag whose weight, texture, and shape feel wrong. Pieces of a human body, headless. Police arrive within hours. Yellow tape seals off Phase 3. Neighbors watch from behind their windows with no idea this is only the beginning. The first real lead doesn't come from a face. It comes from a fingerprint. The identity is confirmed. Babak Khorramdin, an Iranian film director and documentary filmmaker, known for an elegy for Yashar. This could have remained an anonymous murder case, a killer on the run, an unknown motive, a file that might never close. But one simple clue changed everything. A car spotted near the place where the remains were found. Police trace the owner, Akbar Khorramdin, Babak's father. Officers go to that same neighborhood, that same complex, Akbar's home. They knock, no answer. They open the door and step into a house that, from the outside, looked like hundreds of others in the building. In the bathroom, bloodstains. Bloodstains with no innocent explanation. Babak's parents are arrested on the spot, inside the very home where their son grew up. The first confession. What police didn't expect was how quickly the confession came. Within hours of his arrest, with no major pressure, no tears, no hesitation. Akbar Khorramdin starts talking. Interrogators later said his tone sounded more like a mission report than a confession to killing his own son. He says he killed his son. His account goes like this. One Friday afternoon, a simple family lunch, chicken stew. His wife prepared it and served Babak's portion. But before the food reached the table, she went to Akbar and whispered that she had put sleeping pills in Babak's meal. Akbar later said, "From that moment, I stayed alert to carry out the plan." One sentence, no shake in his voice. Babak, unaware of what was happening, sits down and eats. The sedatives slowly take effect, and in the moment he can no longer even fight for his own life. His father attacks him with a knife. The body is moved to the bathroom, the same bathroom where police would later find the bloodstains. There, in a space meant for a family's daily routine, Babak Khorramdin's body is dismembered. That same night, the remains are scattered across Ekbatan, including the very dumpster in Phase 3 where it all began. The motive? In the first interrogations, Akbar spoke about his son's inappropriate and abusive behavior. But that was only part of the truth, because 3 days later, this case deepened in a way no one had expected. The man behind the lens. Before we go deeper into the darker layers of this story, it's worth knowing who Baba Khorramdin was. Because the more you learn about him, the more disturbing the gap becomes between the man the world saw and what was happening behind that door. He was a young director and documentary filmmaker, a familiar name among people who followed Iranian cinema. His most notable work, An Elegy for Yashar, had been discussed and reviewed in film circles. For colleagues and friends, the news of his death, and especially the way he died, was so shocking that, for a while, no one could talk about anything else. His artistic legacy was effectively overshadowed by the manner of his death. But none of them knew what had been happening for years behind the closed doors of that house in Ekbatan. The commander of the house, Akbar Khorramdin, Babak's father, had a military background. He was an infantry colonel at Army headquarters. He spent 69 months on the front lines of the Iran-Iraq War. He was exposed to chemical attacks twice and wounded by shrapnel 4 times. A man who had spent years living under fire was now in a quiet apartment in Ekbatan, the head of a household. His court-appointed lawyer, Hassan Omidvar, later said Akbar's military career was likely the root of his harsh, controlling treatment of his children. Years of military culture and war may have shaped a household where the father's authority was absolute, no exceptions. Picture growing up under a roof where every decision passes through one man. Without exception, forensic evaluations later found that Babak's father suffered from a psychiatric disorder and his mother from a cognitive impairment. But here's the key point. Forensic authorities said these conditions were not severe enough to exempt them from criminal responsibility. Legally, that means they knew exactly what they were doing. But what emerged next showed that this family was far darker than a simple father-son conflict. The forgotten victims. 3 days after the arrest, Akbar Khorramdin, who was expected to be charged only with his son's murder, decided to reveal something much bigger. Interrogators later said no one in the room spoke for a moment after he said it. He confessed that Babak wasn't the only one he had killed. He had killed his daughter too, and his son-in-law. That single sentence reopened a case that had been dormant and forgotten for years: the disappearance of Arzu, the Khorramdin family's daughter. Arzu had multiple sclerosis. Years earlier, she had vanished without a trace. And here's the detail that should unsettle you. No one had ever reported her missing. Fariborz, the family's son-in-law and Arzu's second husband, had disappeared even before her. And what made it even stranger, Fariborz wasn't just a son-in-law. He was also Akbar's sister's son. In other words, Akbar was his uncle too. Akbar told his sister that Fariborz had left the country, and he told Arzu nothing at all. Years passed. No one asked. No one followed up. A family had erased 2 of its own members from existence, and not once in all that time did anyone notice. The absolute cold. But the coldest moment in this entire case came from Babak's mother, Iran Musavisani. She said her daughter, Arzu, had prepared 80 sleeping pills in advance. She poured all of them into her husband Fariborz's food. When Fariborz ate and lost consciousness, Iran said, in the same flat, calm tone, "I killed him. The 3 of us carried the body to the bathroom and dismembered it there. We scattered the remains around Ekbatan that same night." But the sentence that may capture the full coldness of this case, better than any other, was this. A line that investigators said shocked even them. "I'm not at all upset about my children's deaths." She continued, "My husband and I decided together. My husband is very good and kind, but Baba Khorramdin, he used to beat him and do things I'm ashamed to even mention. She also said they had planned to turn themselves in after killing Babak, but were arrested before they could. These statements painted a picture completely different from what it first seemed to be. This was no longer just the story of an angry father. It was the story of a closed, hidden family system. One where violence was a shared decision, not a single moment of rage. The edge of sanity. With these new revelations, the case entered a more complex phase. The central question was this: was Akbar Khorramdin, at the time of these crimes, mentally responsible for his actions? Under Article 149 of Iran's Islamic Penal Code, if it could be proven that the defendant lacked the ability to distinguish right from wrong at the time of the crime, he could be exempted from criminal liability. The case was referred to a 3-member forensic psychiatric commission. That review was never completed. An unfinished sentence. In late autumn of that same year, Akbar Khorramdin suffered a fatal cardiac arrest in prison. He was never tried. Based on legal projections, he would likely have received less than 10 years for the murder of his children, and a lengthy sentence for the murder of his son-in-law, with the victim's family's consent taken into account. But his death left the process permanently unfinished. A case that could have become one of the most important criminal trials in recent years closed without a clear judicial answer. His lawyer later said Akbar Khorramdin never once expressed remorse for these crimes, something the lawyer attributed to the military culture and rigid principles that had shaped his entire life. The mother's fate. But the case didn't end with Akbar's death. One defendant remained: the mother. Iran Musavi Sani, charged as an accomplice in 3 murders and the dismemberment of her children's bodies, remained in custody until her trial finally took place. She ultimately accepted the court's ruling, which under the law reduced her sentence by 1/4 and was sentenced to 3 years and 9 months in prison. The following year, reports circulated claiming she had been released. It later emerged that she had only been granted temporary leave, not a full release. That left the public with one unanswered question: how could a woman who admitted, in her own words, "I'm not upset about my children's deaths," receive less than 4 years in prison for participating in 3 murders, and then return to society? The illusion of safety. On the surface, the Baba Khorramdin case looked like a shocking, sudden murder, but underneath, it was the story of a family that, for years, had eliminated its own members one by one. Behind a facade of complete normality, without anyone noticing. A daughter with multiple sclerosis who disappeared for years and was never reported missing. A son-in-law said to have left the country whom no one ever searched for. And finally, a son whose art was forgotten in the shadow of his brutal death. This case leaves behind a question bigger than one family. How many people right now are disappearing in silence inside seemingly ordinary homes, with no one ever asking? If this video made you think, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to see more dark cases like this one, stay with the channel.